Okay.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Dirk.
Yeah, welcome everybody. Good afternoon. This is Dinrg, Decentralized Internet Infrastructure Research Group of the IETF. So I'm Dirk Kutscher, and I have two co-chairs sitting in front today, Lisha Zhang and Mark McFadden. And maybe briefly explain this. So we realized that Mark and folks had organized a side meeting on a quite similar topic, and so we just got in touch and decided it would be a good idea to join forces and like use this venue for discussing centralization today. So thanks for making it to the meeting. Just a few housekeeping items. I mean, at Thursday, you probably have seen this a few times. So we are also using the Meet Echo queue management for managing questions and so on. So make sure you're signed in into the session. And okay, it's a bit awkward for me to say, but please make sure you're wearing your N95 or FFP2 or FFP3 masks. And yeah, keep your audio and video under control. Okay, so we are following the IETF here, and we are following the Itf Ipr rules. So in short, that means if you hear or say anything that is IPR related, you are expected to inform us in a short time. There's also the privacy and code of conduct that we are running by. If you are not familiar with these rules, please check out these pointers here. And then finally, yeah, just to remind everybody, so this is now a meeting that happens in the Internet Research Task Force. So the research sister organization of the IETF. We are not doing standards here. We may be publishing RFCs and doing internet drafts, so using the same tool chain. But the documents that we produce are mostly informational or experimental, so this is not any internet standards track work here. Okay, and so if you haven't been around in Dinrg, yeah, just think about signing up to the mailing list. So we really need a note taker for today. So we have 1 hour, so not a lot of time. But we are hoping to get many good ideas out of this meeting, and we really need to capture those. And yeah, as usual, note-taking doesn't require a complete record of what is being presented, but just the gist of the discussion, so questions and the core of the answers.
Dirk is being very polite here, but I'll just pick somebody.
Better for you to do it in the room. Yeah.
Mr. Reed, could you take notes? Was that a yes?
It was not.
It was not a yes, okay. Who else can I pick on? Don't all volunteer at once.
Okay, I'll try to take notes, but I haven't been following well.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, we've achieved note taker. Dirk, back to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So there's the CodeMD as usual with the agenda. If you want to use that, that would be great. Yeah, so we have a fairly light agenda today. If you have been around in Dinrg, you may remember that we had a really interactive, engaging workshop, say a bit more than 1 year ago, and with panel discussions, presentations, and so on. And that really brought many good ideas to light. And so Lisha and I finally managed to capture those, and are currently in the process of finalizing a written report with the help of Jeff Houston and Christian Hutema. And so what we planned for today was that Lisha will provide a summary of this report or of this meeting 1 year ago that has, I think, many good points that are worthwhile discussing. And then we hope to, do a round of discussion, get feedback or new ideas, and use this meeting for like also starting like the next steps in this direction. So like figuring out topics, but maybe also ways of working. And without further ado, I would say, Lisha, let's start with the summary.
Thank you, Dirk. I can get it started if you show the slides.
I will.
So this is a very quick report for this workshop we organized last year in June. We should have written the report early. Everyone's busy. So you can see that the report put together as a group effort, and therefore everything goes right. It's a group effort. Anything goes wrong, it's not my own mistake, but we'll fix it. We look forward to people's input into this report. Next slide. So the identification and mitigation effort for internet decentralization actually started a few years back. This is a very incomplete list showing on the slides about the existing internet draft on the topic. In particular, I want to point it out that the first few identifies the observed centralization phenomena, and the second half of the list, you can see that there is a great attention paid to the security issues ongoing on today's internet. It may not be the best thing to say, but let me say it. I think we are yet to gain upper hand to put the internet security really under complete control. I think that's a big factor that I think accelerated the centralization, as we're gonna elaborate in the following report. In short, I think those existing work actually reflected many shared understandings and the insight. But so why this not very early workshop on the topic? We set the goal to say that instead of diving into designing new solutions, let's first understand what are the root causes. What has happened in the last 30-some years that turned the internet from originally somewhat pretty decentralized operations into where we are today? Exactly what happened? Then what we can learn from those observations. We want to put a caveat up front. The workshop discussions are very limited in scope. We largely focused on the application providers consolidation, centralization, and didn't get into other aspects of the consolidation. For example, internet access is obviously today or in the hand of very few providers, and there's a number of other aspects of the centralization. But in the following report summary, we're going to mostly focus on what happened to the applications. So this is only one effort into understanding the problem space. I think more effort will be needed to better understand the overall picture. In the workshop, Jeff Houston, I hope he's here. Thank you, Jeff. If I say anything wrong, please correct me. So Jeff Houston gave a great opening talk and told us that the centralization is nothing new. It's actually started with industrialization back over 100 years. You can observe from history that economy of scale just drives consolidation, so that the industry always evolves towards centralized control over specific industry sectors. And it's kind of a nature. When the corporates wanted to maximize their profit, that's not exactly the same action that's going to result in maximizing the user interest or society's interest as a whole. And therefore, in the history, you can think back at that time, in 1890, the Sherman Antitrust Act to curtail the control power of the industrial giants. And many years later, that the same Antitrust Act also dissolved the AT&T monopoly in the telecom industry. I encourage everyone to actually watch the workshop report, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy Jeff's talk. It's very vivid and very interesting. But look at today's internet industry. There's really not a surprise that this is really by nature. They followed the footsteps of the past giants. Of course, time changed, technology changed, and therefore the specifics are different. The industry giants, they exploited the labor forces to accumulate the profit. And today, the industry of the internet does something different. They gain this enormous personal data and then profit from the advertisement gains. So moving to the next slides, some more specifics. This is given by Christian Huidema. I hope he's online to explain what exactly happened as like the samples through the past 30 years. You can see that the internet centralization, before we paid attention, these pioneer companies, they actually started by investing into provide very much needed service when the internet started, like the search engine, like the email, like social networking, things that the user in general very much wanted. Of course, over the time, those services get consolidated. We started with different search engines and then get into Yahoo and eventually Google take off. For email, I will have more to say later. And social networking, Facebook was not the first one, but today it is a dominant one. And more services get added over time. So you can observe this positive feedback loop. You get more users, you have more incentive and more input to provide those users better services. That's gonna attract more users. Then you get higher revenues, then you attract more users. That's really kind of a snowball rolling effect that gets the big guys even bigger. And when this collecting services, collecting the user information under the title of providing you more service, that goes to a different degree, there's no longer distinguishable from this new term called the surveillance economy. The service providers wants to know you well. So therefore, say when you do search, they can provide you exactly what you want. But the more they know about you, I think the more influence they can have over you. through the information selectively provided to you. There is an excellent book that's in the workshop reference titled Surveillance Capitalism. That book actually provided numerous specific evidences on how Facebook and even Google influenced the internet users' beliefs, understands with regarding to the contemporary political, social, economical issues. Next slide. So the networking started from the dominance of carriers. In the early days, people mostly paid attention to say, hey, which ISPs actually provided service for most users. And that is no longer much of a topic now, because the attention, the money, and the profit have moved up the protocol stack. So later, Microsoft became the dominance in terms of providing the operating system platform. And then you can see today, it's not so much operating system that dominates the market or make the most profit. Instead, it is really the application services. So that, why is the applications? Because the technology moves forward, network services, that really becomes commodity services. While you look at the applications, when you control that, you essentially get much easier time to become a monopoly. So if you move on to the next slide, the applications, please, this specifics number 3. The applications actually is much easier to become dominant because they don't have to do anything lower layer to standardize this, standardize that. Instead, they just install the application on your browsers, and then they are ready to go. So so if we want to do decentralized applications, Christian warned us it's really uphill battle against the centralized monopoly, because decentralized systems or applications, you need the standards. And we all know how long and how much effort that it takes to get into the standard ready and go. It's really far easier, cheaper, faster for the application monopoly providers to add new things, add new features. They don't need standardization. They don't need to coordinate with their competitors. They just do it and deploy the code. So in putting the workshop report together, we actually speculated this question. That is, we commonly hear people saying that the distributed protocols somehow get centralized. So we looked into answering that question. It's really that the protocols get centralized or something else actually happened. You look at the protocols, TCP/IP merely shapes the bits around. Even the higher level protocols, DNS, it facilitates that shaping by translating the names into addresses. The protocols are carriers. They don't make a decision on where the packets moves to. It's the application deployment that actually make that decision. And the next slides, I'm gonna say that in the early days, I was very, very early in the game, right? I was first at MIT, later I went to Xerox PARC, then I went to UCLA. Even after I got to UCLA, UCLA provided DNS services, email services, our own web services. That's the norm of the day. The applications were decentralized, provided by largely individual institutions. But the UCLA did that as a service to UCLA user community. They're not revenue generating business. But once the service providers grabbed those applications, making them to be revenue generating services, then it's really economical forces drives consolidation. The bigger, the better, the more profit, more control, and hence bigger. So as you can see on the slides, we just say that the bigger sizes, you can afford more investment into the better services, and in particular, better defense against all kinds of failures and security attacks. I give you a specific example. Email, who can do better spam filter than Gmail? I guess probably no one. There's very few places that still run their own email services. I think the UCLA CS department as one of those exceptions. Even the engineering school turned into Gmail service. I can tell you that I have a Gmail for my personal use. I have the department email for my business, for my work use. And I can tell the difference. Yeah. On my Gmail, there's virtually no spam. On my CS account, there's a big percentage. So that really illustrates that centralized service does have their edges because the lack of effective security mitigation make providing individual services become just less and less viable. So I put it there to say that there's this economy of scale that drives the centralized service to become bigger, but security really plays a big role in accelerating this whole process. So I hope those two slides, last one and this one, help to answer the question, how come the used to be distributed applications become centralized? That's because they become revenue generating services, and the economy drives them into centralization. And thanks to Mark, he offered this reference. You can see the pointer to the real paper. This is just a sample evidence to show that for web hosting, there's yet another service that gets centralized. This is only show the 5-year span of web hosting for websites under different TLDs. You can see in the 5 years, the centralized services roughly doubled. I think over the last 2 years, it's probably getting a lot worse as well. So if we move to the next slides, we can say that, make it short, there are multiple factors, but the top 2 factors driving the centralization is economy of scale and security threats. That's, I think, the outcome conclusion out of the workshop. Just make it simple. So what to take it away, going to the next slides, it's just these 2 things. I'm repeating myself. The centralization becomes so rapidly advancing because there's very few regulations to countermeasure the big market force. The economy of scale really motivates corporations to go big, and we cannot deny that fact. As a matter of fact, Jeff pointed out very clearly, this is not really the pure size. The real concern about centralization is their control power, their influence. There's a centralized influence and control over all the users and over the society as a whole. That's our big concern. So the security challenges, why security accelerated the whole centralization, because we don't really have this magical power to mitigate the security threats very effectively. For DDoS mitigation, that's a fact that the major mitigation means is absorbing them. And the only big systems has the capacity to do that. There are limitations on the existing web security framework that doesn't allow your phone and my phone communicate directly. How we communicate? Go up to the clouds, go through the Facebook, then we communicate. Your phone doesn't really know my phone, whom that belongs to. There's no security. In today, no security, no communication. And we don't really have security solutions as of now deployed for direct user-to-user communication to enable truly decentralized applications. That's just maybe biased opinion. And then the workshop actually spent some time elaborate on the difficulties on developing and deploying security solutions. It's hard. It's really hard. And people pointed out, I forget who mentioned that, security itself is really hard, and interoperable security is even harder if you want to decentralize applications. If we go next slide, I think my time is roughly up. So reflections aside, I mentioned earlier, as Jeff pointed out, there's a conflict between the corporate profit maximization interest and the society's overall interest. So the society thrives when you keep a balance between economy, between the regulation and the technologies. And today we're in this kind of a limbo stage because economy drives things forward by and large. The regulation, I think they really try, but the big challenge, what exactly to regulate and how? And then technologies, as I mentioned, we are falling behind those security threats. We don't have effective solutions to mitigate them as of now. So as a result, I think at least for us drafted the report, we believe that the effective regulations and the legislation will actually playing a deciding factor in curtailing the unconstrained market. As much as this IETF community has a brilliant engineers, researchers, designers, the technology solutions alone, we don't think that it can mitigate the centralization on its own. So it doesn't mean that we just step aside and watching how the regulation goes. As I mentioned already, regulators need our help to figure out what to regulate. I think it's really our responsibility to help them. And we work with the regulations effectively by providing new solutions for the already identified security problems. We listed a couple here. Your input is really there. What additional new technical solutions will help assist the regulation, the new regulation, and move the internet away from further consolidation and towards the decentralized control. So this is my last slide, essentially, oh, there's one more. So further discussions is needed, and we thought that Dinrg could be the platform for collecting all the inputs and for being a platform to carry on these future discussions. I think they're really hard questions that need answers. So say that, I always tell the students, if you're facing a big problem, where do you get started? You ask yourself this question: if the God grants all your wishes, what do you wish to happen? If we have a clear answer to that question, then we can, from there, figure out how we get there. So that very first question is, what do we wish to see as the ideal outcome out of all this effort mitigating decentralization? And that need to take into account all these major factors in the play. Big data has advantages, economy of scale has advantages. At the same time, we must protect the end user interest. So, ideally, can we gain back the control, but without necessarily dissolving the cyber giant? What regulations to suggest, and what kind of measurement input we will provide for the regulators to make their new rules, and what kind of input you can have put into that list. So I guess, Dirk, that probably we're gonna just start a discussion. So what's missing from whatever the summary I just presented, and what future directions people want to suggest, and what the specific work we should start now.
Yeah, we have a few people lined up in the queue, and let's start with Marie-José.
Yeah, I really like this workshop, but I come from a completely different world. I come from the IoT world, where we have I would say, the internet and the small, and where we're at this point doing distributed and very decentralized applications inside our own networks. And so, of course, there's blockchain and all kind of other stuff, but I'm not even going there because a lot of time we're within the same domain, so we don't really have to deal with this. But when the challenge that we have is because of decentralization, a lot of the systems we're using are vertically integrated. So although we have two sensors that are co-located in the same place, the first time they talk to one another is somewhere in AWS or Azure or Google or whatever. And we're working really hard to make sure that we can create the applications that are necessary for next generation industrial systems, for example, or smart cities, where sensors talk to one another because they are located in the same place. So I understand that your workshop looked at, I would say, the big picture, but there's also this internet in the small, this need to have co-located devices on the same network to be able to talk to one another and not being completely vertically integrated. And I think decentralization actually is preventing that. And the reason we need decentralization is we need to have the system to talk to one another. And you were there maybe early this morning when somebody was mentioning the use of AI and networking. And if we want to have data-driven systems and AI-driven systems, we need to have local information to be integrated. So I would say, on top of the conclusions that you have about, I would say that the applications that are used by billions of people, there's also the application that are used by billions of sensors. And it's a completely different world. But we
Okay.
are facing this every day. So that's a comment. I'm done.
Right. Thank you. By the way, are we taking notes?
I'm taking notes. I said I would.
Yes, we have.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, Dino's next.
Hi, this is Dino. I'm not going to ask a question, but I want to get a reaction by using an example. I think all the monopoly companies that are offering centralization are helping for the examples you use with email, and sometimes maybe we give up the decentralization for the advantages of centralization. But in the case of text messaging, Leisha and I are in the same room here. The monopolies offer security as a feature, and they believe it has value and that we'll pay for it. Maybe not explicitly, but implicitly. But if I want to text Leisha right now in the room, and we're on our iPhones, our messages are going to Apple. They claim that they can't read the messages because our keys are local, but they could be storing the data, which we don't know what they're going to do with later or not. But we can still communicate, and it's still somewhat private. But we both have iPhones that have their own wireless interfaces, and we can talk directly to each other right now over Bluetooth. And if the users objected or requested this feature to these monopoly companies where we would want to talk directly to each other, still encrypted, but across the airway here, 20 meters, that this would be a good feature. And I have a feeling they would be motivated to do it if we'd be willing to pay extra for this feature, just like we pay extra for not having advertisements in various apps. Reactions?
So let's collect a few views and statements, and then maybe try to come back and structure this a little bit. So far we heard things about local communication, so IoT in the small. So Dino just alluded to direct local communication and the trust anchor topic that Lisha actually talked about. But let's hear from a few more people. Vittorio is next.
Hi, Vittorio Bertola from Open Exchange. So I'm sorry, I didn't. This is all I know about the workshop. So I only this is an immediate reaction. So you ask what is missing. Well, I was surprised because in the end you listed these two factors as the major factors for centralization, and okay, security, I agree. And then you mentioned economy of scale. But economy of scale is something that, it allows someone to outperform the other companies on the market by offering the same product at a better quality at the same price or at a lower price with the same quality. And this can be true in the lower levels, maybe in the infrastructural products, but most of the consumer-facing products we are talking here are free products, like instant messaging, like search. And so there is no price competition for search or for instant messaging or forward. And so I don't understand how economy of scale can really be a factor here, except in the fact that maybe it increases the margin for the companies that are providing this, but it doesn't make things better for consumers because it doesn't even lower the price. And so I'm also surprised by not seeing the other factors that are often mentioned. I don't know, maybe it's just a matter of terminology, but when we have these discussions in other environments, mostly in Europe, mostly maybe in competition discussions, there are other words that come up like walled gardens, network effect, self-preferencing, so a number of practices which are both technical and business practices. So I'm wondering whether this came up in any way, whether it's just a matter of aligning the language, or whether it's really a part of the analysis that is missing.
I don't know if I can jump out of the queue to answer your question. I think search is a very important service. It's only today's implementation of search requires a centralized monopoly. But me, as maybe I'm the researcher, too blue sky thinking, but I firmly believe there are different ways to implement the search function that doesn't have to be provided by centralized monopoly. Okay, we need to open mind and look into different ways of doing the same thing and not confine our thinking to say this is how things get done and this way of doing business need monopoly. Let's think about different approaches. We can talk offline. We actually have
I agree. Then if your mobile phone will just give you by default the centralized search of a single company, then you can make whatever you want.
Like Dino already mentioned, we are so great in terms of the low-level communication technologies. The Bluetooth can work, Wi-Fi can work directly. What is not working is the protocol. The individual users have no identities, and therefore you don't have associated crypto credentials to enable the secure communication directly between Dino and me. And this is the thing we could have done, but we haven't.
Sachin.
Yeah, hi. There's Sachin here. At this point that you made about the email thing, the point that the university email was not removing as much spam as Gmail has been doing, and just the email example you gave about spam, yeah. So this comes back to the point that I was actually discussing with the Fastmail guys, and this is important because technically speaking, email is not something that cannot be run easily by normal people. I mean, reasonably technical people. We are all capable out here, I guess, of running our own email servers. At least 80% would be. The standards, the servers just run. The problem happens is when I run my own server, somewhere someone would have added that particular IP address to some block list which will prevent my email from going out, which does not happen if I'm taking an email service from a Gmail or a Microsoft or somebody like that. And that's, I think, one of the issues that we possibly should, I do not know how we can solve it. It's more of a social issue rather. Technically, I think it's a solved sort of a thing, but we need to get back to the basics and try to possibly understand what people really want to decentralize, how they want to decentralize it, what they're giving up. I mean, that's just my thinking.
Yeah, thank you.
Again, I'm so old. When the email started in my early days, it's all decentralized email servers. Individual organizations run their things. By the way, during those years, there's no spam. There's no compromises. It's really the security, the big factor, destroyed decentralized email service. So the question is, can we find the solutions that effectively mitigate those security threats? I think that is the question.
Hi, Andrew Camping speaking. In terms of, you posed the question, what's missing? I would have expected to see loss of resilience on here. So I think there's been a significant loss of resilience in the internet infrastructure, arguably because of standards and because of consolidation in different ways. So I think that's an issue. I agree with Vittorio that it's not economies of scale, it's much more about network effects at the application layer. So we expect reference to that. And the other thing I don't think I saw is loss of privacy. And again, because of the application layer and the network effects of the application layer, there's research out there which tells us that people don't want to give up their personal data, but feel they have no choice. So they're reluctantly giving it up. And that's an enormous issue. Again, that's because of the network effects. They feel they have no choice but to use these apps. And therefore, the sort of digital surveillance that's undertaken at the application layer is a huge problem. And it's facilitated by the consolidation. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. So just as a notice, I just closed the queue because I think we're running out of time otherwise. But let's move on. Mallory, please.
Hi, everybody. Mallory Nodal from the Center for Democracy and Technology. I think that the report back is really interesting, and I've been thinking about it a lot, so thanks for presenting it. I wonder if it doesn't look very, very different at different layers of the internet. I mean, I was just thinking about the case of hardware. And then you follow that naturally all the way down, and it's like, do we want a bunch of companies mining for rare minerals in the Congo? Like, no. So, you know, there are going to be some natural points where things get centralized, but potentially mapping out very specifically in each of these layers from each of these perspectives all along the stack, what are the sort of benefits sometimes of centralization? What are obviously the detriments? What are the mitigations? Also, what does it look like from providers as users versus actual end users? I think a lot of us in this space think about end users, but we actually come to the space as implementers and our users in our own right in a different sort of view. So I think that work could actually be really useful because we do have a lot of really interesting examples that we like to talk about a lot, especially when it comes to things like interoperability or the anti-patterns, like this idea that, blockchain solutions are fully decentralized when we know very well from a code perspective they aren't, but, so these examples abound, and a lot of people have brought up really good ones today. I wonder if that sort of overall very high-level survey of different effects wouldn't help bring a little bit more a concrete approach to actually mitigating them in very different ways and understanding where one solution in one layer isn't actually the same solution you would get all the way up in the application layer, for example.
Okay, thank you. Jeff.
Hi, let me try this with a mask on. Is that too loud?
It's okay.
Folk have said I've often get too depressed about this and just spread around my depression. I'm going to continue with that because this is about as bad as it gets. And you sort of look at what can you do? And the first question is, the whole idea of the internet was to walk away from a highly regulated structure where national entities ran the telephone systems and they ran by a common set of rules into a market-based, deregulated structure where competitive market pressures were meant to impose a discipline on the industry that provided users with what they wanted. So will markets naturally get us out of the situation they drove us to? And the answer is no, because what's happened is that monopolistic power that's being exercised in these markets now makes any form of competitive entry suicidal. If you wander around and look for venture capital these days to disrupt the market, you need tens of billions of dollars of venture capital. Any less, you're burning the money in a bonfire. Will markets help us? No. Will regulation help? No. The reason why, oddly enough, is we've enabled an abundant computing, communications and storage system that now enables the projection of power globally, way beyond nation states, way beyond regional coalitions. So any group, any country, even the EU, an amalgam of countries, finds itself in an acute disadvantage because they cannot amass the regulatory impost, and there is no template. This is not telephony anymore. There's no industrial widgets. How do you regulate? What should we do? And the real answer to that is, we don't know. No one knows. It's a new experience. Okay, so those two won't help. Will users get us out of this? No. Because this entire industry is focused on giving users precisely what they want. TikTok is what they want, not what they're forced to do. Oh God, I've got to do TikTok today. No way. This entire industry is actually based around understanding and predicting your needs and meeting them. So anything you try and do to curb that, you're actually going against what users want. I want my search, I want my mail, I want my Facebook, whatever. And so users aren't going to help. So that brings the depressing picture. We've been here before, and Christian Ipr actually alluded to it in chat. If you think you can get out of this with evolutionary change, you're dreaming. This is not going to be evolutionary. The pressures build, and the only way the change happens is actually revolutionary. At some point, it becomes such a damning wall of stasis that nothing ever changes, that the pressures to change knock it all down. That's the way we destroyed telephony. It was unpleasant. Lots of folk lost jobs. All of these changes ultimately, once you get to this position, there's no clean way out other than actually revolutionary ways that actually end up destroying the incumbency in the existing sets and replacing it with different structures. We're going to do the same again. And, I think that's wrong. I think it's really sad, but frankly, I can't see any other way out.
Okay, Lisha, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I already said something, but let me say just a couple. One is that, let's be clear, the internet did break the monopoly. It's really broke the telecom connectivity monopoly. So therefore, today, when we talk about centralization, we're talking about different things that get centralized, not the low-level IP-level connectivity. Not yet. I don't know whether it actually will be consolidated in some near future. So today's centralization is really at a much higher level than what the IP started, aimed for. I want to make that very clear. As of today, the BGP regulated connectivity that's not in any single hand yet. Regarding the revolution Jeff talked about, that's, I think, I very much agree with. I hinted in the earlier comment about how to do search today. If you do the search Google does, then Google found the best way. But if you really open up the mind, think in the fundamentally different ways of doing search. That's really a revolution that can bring you a very different world from that.
Okay, Christian.
Okay, let's first say that I kind of agree with Jeff that doesn't look good, and it will take some kind of drastic thing to break it. On the other hand, I am not so much for heads on the top of spikes and things like that. I mean, blood only becomes blood and more blood. So, what would be the pacific way to do that? The one thing that appears to me that was a bit missing in Licia's summary is that a huge part of the problem is the accumulation of power. And the accumulation of power is not just about industrial strengths, but it's also about big data. And big data can be used to make better product, but it can also be used as a barrier to entry. It can be used as a mean of influence and things like that. Big data itself derives from a very specific decision to fund the internet services using advertisement and make them appear free. And behind this power and decentralization power, we have this advertisement business and personalized advertisement, which is largely driven by big data now. It has also driven the acquisition of data. So I believe that if we want one avenue in which to start pushing the ball, regulating big data and regulating also the making of money by trafficking into user data is a way to do that. Because if people, if you look at the industry in which people pay directly for their services, you do see concentration, but you also see competition. People pay for their car, and there are many car companies. People pay for their air travel, and there are many air travel companies. But if you don't pay, free brings centralization. And I think that the one revolution for the internet, it has to stop being free.
Okay, let's hear from Dominic.
Thank you. Looks like I get the last word. What's been interesting about this discussion is that it shows that we need further discussion and that this particular group is probably the best place for it. There's so much interest and impassioned interest that I've just seen in the last 30 minutes. But also just a couple of other thoughts and ideas for direction. One is measurement. We've already seen a couple of really good presentations in the workshop last year and researchers looking at that. I particularly also like Mallory's suggestion on looking at different layers. Russ, who can't be here today, has a really great draft on protocol consolidation, which the point of which is around complexity. And finally, I know we've just been discussing the economic point of view, which I do think is really a main driver. But also looking at the unintended consequences of regulation and other aspects that show up around the ecosystem of the technical aspects would be a really good approach. So thank you for having this discussion today.
Thanks, Dominic. Yeah, that was actually a good statement in a sense that so I mean we have heard many inputs, and so even if you, for example, buy Jeff's pessimistic view, you have there are different things you could do, right? So you could say, think about developing disruptive technologies. But even if you do a revolution, somebody probably should analyze things very, very well, like say, so what are the factors, what is has been the history, and so on. So we have been circling around all these different potential activities. So in the workshop last year and also today, and so yeah, we felt it would be maybe interesting to identify, say, activity topics that people would be most interested in for, say, follow-up activities. And yeah, it's Dinrg started with a, say, maybe over-ambitious approach some years back, actually, when people thought, okay, blockchain is saving us from centralization. And so now we have taken this step back, and so also at the workshop last year, I mean, we heard really very well thought through presentations of the historic developments, and also the commercial centralization, concentration, and the question is, so what's next? So where can we actually make a difference? And so that's, I think, something where we have gotten new inputs today, but we need to structure this somehow. And so that's, I think, next on the agenda for us.
So I think that might be my cue. We only have a couple minutes left, but let me sort of look to the future rather than the workshop in the past. What I'd like to do is, if you look at the second bullet that's on the screen right now, one of the things that we observed in the last 12 to 18 months is that there are many people writing independent submissions, individual submissions, that are talking about various features of consolidation and centralization. Some of them are talking about the economic part of it. Some of them are talking about the architectural part of it, how centralization affects things like the end-to-end principle and so forth. Some of it talks about specific protocols. But we do have a lot of independent drafts that are floating around that don't have a home to talk about. There's not a place in either the IETF or the IRTF to actually do this work. And I had set up a side meeting today to actually talk about how to fix that problem, how to find a new home for the work that is obviously, first of all, already going on. And second of all, as Dominique said, the passion in the room talking about the results of the workshop. And so I'm going to propose, I'd like to propose, and I'll take this to the list as well, that Dinrg become that focal point, and that for the individual contributions that have been made on centralization and consolidation, that we bring it to a research group that's actively interested in it and actually can be a home to future discussion. Keeping Dinrg active and sort of energized on the topic. And again, giving individual authors a place to go to discuss their ideas, something that's really missing now. Now we're almost out of time, but that's a proposal that you'll see on the mailing list. And if there's support for it, I think the chairs and I will move forward to try to make that happen. And that would be the future direction here, is to activate Dinrg by actually making it an active home for these kinds of conversations, but also not just the conversations, but real contributions, right? Contributions on economic aspects, contributions on architectural aspects, contributions on protocol aspects. And we see that there are individuals already interested in doing that. And so that's the proposal that I'm going to make for moving us forward here in Dinrg. Given that we are nearly out of time, Dirk, I once again encourage all of you to be on the mailing list, where I'll actually put that proposal to the mailing list as well. But maybe let me hand it back to Dirk here to finish up.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
There's still 2 people in the queue. I don't know if you want to honor their request.
Yeah, so I mean, we still have a bit of time. So Christian, do you want to add something?
I think that if someone wants to add something, should be Tommy. He makes a very good point. I mean, if we think that cutting off the trafficking of data will cut off the oxygen that feeds centralization, then the IETF has something clear to do, which is minimizing data in everything we do. And minimal data will be minimizing data across protocols would be very nice. It's something that we can do. The other thing that we could do is look at the very example that Lisha has given about, say, distributed DOS and things like that. There is work going on in the internet, in the IETF to have open solutions against those problems. So the more work we get there, the better we make the system as well. These are 2 concrete areas in which we can work and might very well have results. As for the third thing, which is, can we develop distributed applications? And yes, of course, we know we can develop distributed applications. We've been doing that for 50 years. I mean, that's not the issue.
Okay, so Lenny is the last in the queue, in the closed queue.
Thank you. So I think what can we as engineers do? We as people who contribute to the IETF, what can the IETF do? I think it comes down to the best we can hope for is to build solutions that lower the bar to entry and make it inexpensive for anyone to contribute. Now, you know, if the giants end up then providing a level of value that the smaller players, decentralized players, couldn't meet, then I don't know that there's a solution to that. You know, ultimately, the consumer decides, and if, you know, the consumer finds Gmail to be better than running a mail server in their house, they're going to do that. As one of the few people who run a mail server in my house, it used to be easy. It's not easy now. It's kind of a pain in the ass. You know, people move to where they find value, and if they're going to find value from a giant, they're going to use the giant. I don't know that we can. I don't know we can fix that, and I'm pretty confident regulation. I don't have a lot of confidence that regulation could solve that problem. I'd be more fearful that whatever regulation comes would probably make things worse, and would probably empower giants more than it would hurt them. So, you know, just empirical evidence does not suggest that regulation helps giants or hurts giants, but rather it usually helps them. So I think ultimately the best thing we can do is to focus on designing solutions and empowering technologies and evangelizing technologies that democratize, you know, the contributors of content and the users of the technology. And, you know, whoever builds the best mousetrap wins, whether it's, you know, a bunch of small companies or a few large ones. But I think that this working group does provide value in, you know, maybe creating a level of consciousness on those issues.
Okay, we are out of time. Lisa, do you want to say some final words?
I think it's a really interesting discussion. I appreciate this last speaker input. We can chat more afterwards. But I guess this is a very good starting point. Like Mark mentioned, that we can get this Dinrg as the platform to as the focal point to continue this conversation. I really agree with that suggestion. That's all I'm to say now.
All right. Thank you very much for coming, and have a nice evening in Philadelphia. Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to organize interim meetings. That's a wish. if we can put our act together. So stay tuned on the mailing list.